So warm welcome everyone to the first unit of the Teacher Training Toolkit, Multilingual Resources for Primary Schools in the Gambia. So in this unit, we'll go over a few important facts and definitions so that we can have fruitful discussions regarding what teachers might need to do when they teach in linguistically diverse contexts. This is obviously very relevant to the Gambia, where teachers and learners commonly speak one or more languages such as Serer, Sarahule, Aku, Hassaniya Arabic, Balanta, Karaninka, and so on and so forth. So first we'll go over a few key terms for us to really understand multilingualism in education. Then we'll talk a little bit about translanguaging pedagogy, which is what is underpinning this teacher training toolkit. And then we'll conclude by talking about linguistic diversity in Africa and in the Gambia. So when we talk about multilinguals, it seems to be useful to remind ourselves what the difference between monolingualism and multilingualism is. Here the term language variety, or variety, is a term that's used by social linguists to refer to any form of a language. So it could be a dialect, a sociolect, a register, etc. Now, on the other hand, and it's also very useful in terms of discussing linguistic diversity, we've got the notion of language repertoire. And a person's language repertoire is effectively all the varieties that this person speaks. It could be languages, it could be dialects, it could be various things, as I've just mentioned. Now, the activity for this unit is asking you to produce a language map. What the language map is a visual representation of your language repertoire. Some people decide to draw a house or a map or a heart, or how you will draw it is up to you. But effectively, this piece of paper will capture all the varieties that you speak. Now, some people would argue that in your language repertoire, you can include languages you only speak a few words in, or even languages you can only recognize but not necessarily speak a word of. For our sake, I think it's probably more useful if we say, okay, our language repertoire are all the languages in which we can handle at least a simple conversation. So conversation in at the market, for example, buying vegetables. Now, when you do the activity, bear in mind that you might want to for example, say, speak about the specific varieties, language varieties you speak. So you might say, if you speak Serer, that you speak Nyominka, which is the variety of Serer spoken in fishing areas such as Gunjur, Tanje, and so on. So it's worth emphasizing that multilinguals do things with language which monolinguals simply cannot do. This is very obvious for a lot of people in the Gambia, for example, because most people are multilingual. Translation, I feel that you'll be able to relate to, so it's about saying what was said in one language, word for word in another language. Code switching, on the other hand, note that the word code here means the same as variety, so it's switching from one variety, one language to another. And you can see here that actually it doesn't need to be two languages, it could be two or more languages that are involved when we're code switching. And translanguaging is the next term I list here. Now it's a more inclusive term. Effectively, it covers anything that a multilingual can do with language. So in that regard, it covers translation and code switching, etc. So it's about communicate. What this term emphasizes, it's communication rather than focusing on individual languages. So it's conceptually a little bit different. And it's worth emphasizing here, that there are many benefits to being multilingual. some would say that, it keeps your brain healthy as you age. It also can give children an academic advantage. It can improve, therefore, their employment prospects once they leave school, and so on and so forth. So as you know, I'm a linguist, and sometimes I pay probably too much attention to labels. But here, I think it's probably worth spending a minute or two to think about indigenous languages. So first, what are indigenous languages? They're, let's say, languages that are native to a region or a community, and that somehow have evolved over an extended period of time. Now, if we think about indigenous languages in the Gambia, we can see that depending on the discussion, they're referred to differently. So they might be called national languages, or Gambian languages, or local languages, or indigenous languages. I'm sure that we could find probably two or three more terms in English, let alone how these languages might be labeled in Gambian languages. Now, a term that is used when we talk about integrating indigenous languages in education is that of L1. And I want to take a little bit of time to distinguish between what it means at the level of the individual in comparison to at the level of the schools. So L1, sometimes we also use the terms home language or native language or mother tongue. I'm not going to go into which terms are best. They've all got strengths and weaknesses. But what I like about the definition of L1 for individuals that is shown on the slide is that it underlines that it's not only about the language that a child learns first. For that matter, it's worth emphasizing that in multilingual contexts such as the Gambia, it's not infrequent for people to have more than one L1 and then to go on and acquire an L2 and an L3, etc., etc. Now, if we move on to L1 at the level of schools, so it's the main language that a multilingual education program uses to build a foundation for literacy and learning. Here, obviously, we wouldn't be talking about L1 at school if there's only one language, so hence the reference to a multilingual education program. So ideally, it is the same as the learner's L1, but we know that continues not to be true in many countries in Africa and beyond. But that's precisely making sure that it is the same as the learner's L1 is precisely what the new 2023 language of instruction policy for the Gambia is trying to achieve, because it's saying we'll have the 7 national languages as languages of instruction from ECD to grade 3. So why are these words important? Well, for two main reasons. On the one hand, because they involve different outlooks on what language is. Think about what I said about translanguaging, for example, where the focus was more about communication, what we do with language, rather than individual named languages. And also because language is central in education. Most of what happens in education is centered around language. Textbooks, us communicating in the classroom, us giving feedback to learners, etc., etc. But language questions are even more important in multilingual countries, and even more important when you have local languages living alongside a European language, which is what happens in a lot of post-colonial contexts. Concretely, if we were to go back to what we were saying about L1 in relation to schools, well, these labels are useful because they're able to show us that somehow the L1 might be somewhat different from the learner's L1. That's if, for example, a standard variety, the learner is speaking a local non-standard variety, but the L1 of the school is the standard variety. It might be, it might be quite different but the children might still be familiar with the L1 of the school. So that is, for example, if a widely spoken L2 in the community, which happens a lot in the Gambia, is from the same linguistic family as the learner's L1. Or it might be the L1 of the school and the L1 of the children might be completely different. So that is, for example, if a state or provincial or European language that is not familiar to the learner is used as a language of instruction. So I think what's interesting about the Gambia is the fact that, you know, the notion of flexible multilingualism is familiar to most people. You know, you could argue everyone in the Gambia. So people, you know, people know that multilingual speakers switch from one language to another, mixed languages, that they use their languages creatively, that they know how to do this, you know, very skillfully and adjust what they're doing with language from one situation to another, and that all of this happens without, you know, unconsciously, without people actively thinking about it. So what I want to do here is draw your attention to differences between three contexts that I know. So the Gambia on the other hand, and the UK and France, to give you the opportunity to think probably about things that, as people immersed in, you know, a highly linguistically diverse environment, might take for granted. So if we focus on the Gambia, you know, we know that, you know, most people speak more than two languages, and therefore we can talk about the Gambia as a multilingual country, and about multilingualism therefore is something that characterizes the Gambia. On the other hand, if you take countries such as the UK and France, yes, there are also in the UK and France many people who speak more than two languages, but this is mostly because they learnt these languages at school or because of migration. So we can't say that multilingualism is a defining characteristic of the UK and France in the same way as it is in the Gambia. Now, as far as using the word multilingual, we have been focusing on, you know, we have talked about so far about multilingual teachers, multilingual learners, education, but you can see here that it can be applied to a range of things, to communities, policies, regions, countries, books, materials, etc. So this adjective can be used in relation to people, but not only people. Now, throughout the course, you'll sometimes hear me talk about translanguaging pedagogy. And we've got a quote here, and I'll engage with it with you. So translanguaging pedagogy is about you and your students. It draws on the languages you have available to your group. So what's important here is that it's all the languages that you engage with, even those that you might not speak. So, and it goes on, so even if you don't speak all or any of the other languages your students do, you can welcome them and encourage the learners to use them in the classroom. And a bit later we'll go over why this might be beneficial. Some of the the main reasons is about inclusion, it's about access to education, but not only. So I just wanted to emphasize that what's informing what we're doing is translanguaging pedagogy, which is a bit different from what might be possible, for example, at policy level. So where, for example, including all, imagine, both indigenous and exogenous languages as languages of instruction would be very challenging. But at the level of developing bespoke teaching aids, then that is possible, and it is beneficial to give all these languages in the language linguistic repertoire of your students. To give them visibility is quite important. What do we mean by pedagogy? A quick reminder: it's it's about the method. the methods that you use in your teaching, your approach to teaching. So when it's translanguaging, you're including all the languages in your education space. So hopefully you're all clear now about the fact that when a translanguaging approach is adopted in the classroom, the teaching and the learning value the use of multiple languages in the classroom. And here I've got some example of translanguaging pedagogy in action, what it might look like. So for example, you've got students being allowed to use their full linguistic repertoire in the classroom, code switching and translation being used to deepen and enrich the learning. The teacher encouraging students to compare and contrast the languages they know to support linguistic competency. The teacher learns keywords and phrases in the students' languages to validate these languages and signal that languages and multilingualism are useful resources, etc., etc. So here what I'm trying to do is to explain to you what a translanguaging approach in the classroom might look like. What we're focusing on in this teacher training course is what adopting this pedagogical approach might mean in terms of developing written teaching resources. So also some would call them teaching aids. However, I'm also aware that some of you may be doing, for example, some of the things that are mentioned on this slide, but admittedly the examples given here are more about things that are done orally in the classroom. Before we look at the list of languages spoken in the Gambia, I wanted to say a few words about linguistic diversity in Africa. So I've brought up a website, the Statista website, which is drawing on data from the Ethnologue. Those of you who know this platform, they know that when it comes to African countries, sometimes, all languages are not listed or there might be inaccuracy. However, for our purpose, it's useful in that it's showing that quite a large number of countries in Africa have have hundreds of languages spoken, and if not hundreds, dozens. And if we scroll down here, we find the Gambia here with 11 languages. Now, as educators, I think it's important to bear in mind that linguistic diversity is found outside of Africa. So if you take, for example, Papua New Guinea, it has 800 languages. India, about 780 languages. Indonesia, 700 languages. We could add Malaysia, etc. So what this means is that there's a lot that we can learn if we're interested in how to handle linguistic diversity in the classroom. There's a lot that we can learn from each other, whether we are or not in Africa. So comparatively, the Gambia has a relatively manageable number of languages for teachers. So what you can see here on the left-hand side is, in black, is the list of the 7 national languages which have been integrated in education since let's say 2011, 2015, when the national language literacy lessons were introduced, and the new language of instruction policy also continues to work with these languages. So they're being used both for literacy development, but as of 2023, it's also been decided that they would be used as languages of instruction. It has long been argued that the first 5 national languages in this list cover most of the school-age population in the Gambia, and most of the Gambian population for that matter. But as you can see, there are many more languages spoken in the Gambia, and it's worth mentioning as well that outside of Kombo, it's quite frequent for schools to have one or two languages dominating a school. Now, to conclude, I hope that it's clear to everyone that the toolkit is underpinned by a desire to promote language equity, access to education and inclusion. And as others do, we take the view that giving spaces to all languages spoken by children, all languages in children's linguistic repertoire in the classroom, in schools, can help achieve this. And also, I'm hoping that it's now apparent to all of you that this is one of the main tenets of translanguaging pedagogy. So from that perspective, multilingualism is seen as natural, as desirable, and also as a resource that teachers can draw on. So when we talk about multiliteracies, multilingual habitus, translanguaging spaces, etc., etc., the assumption is precisely that multilingualism is a resource. Now, I am aware some of you might be watching this and thinking, well, not very much, I knew all this. So I'm aware that a lot of what we discussed in this initial lecture wasn't new to you, but hopefully it's given you an opportunity to reflect on linguistic diversity, to reflect on what it means for your professional practice, and also on on what multilingual and translanguaging pedagogy mean. I want to finish on a quick note regarding the term variety. So remember, the term variety is deemed to be more neutral than the word language. However, and I think this is something we really must bear in mind, whichever language we speak, we necessarily speak a variety. So standard, what we might call standard languages are a variety. What might be a problem sometimes in discussions around education is when we're assuming that the standard language is the language. So that's maybe something that you might want to bear in mind, and also to bear in mind that what we mean by standard language in the Gambia might be different from what we might have in mind in other contexts. So if you take the UK, for example, we think standard language really means, and that's true of other contexts, really means the variety that's spoken by the highest status people in capital cities, such as RP or Queen's English or Standard American English, if you take the States, for example. But in the Gambia and other countries as well, standard languages have the implications are a little bit different. So something worth bearing in mind. But whichever language we speak, it's necessarily a variety. Now, same as with all the units, please engage with the activity. So the activity for this first unit is for you to draw a language map. Please do please share it with us. Do check the resources as well as part of this unit. So for example, it includes a reference to the 2022-2023 International Decade of Indigenous Languages and other useful resources as well. I also strongly encourage you to engage with the glossary that Carol Benson developed, and which we included in this toolkit to support you further with your learning. So please do take time to engage with it. And some of the definitions that we looked at as part of this unit are actually drawn directly on this glossary. And as ever, you can use the Tell Us section to communicate with us. You can answer the question asked, but you don't have to. If you want to share other things with us, please by all means feel free to use the Tell Us section as well. And well, I look forward to seeing you in the second unit, and I hope you've enjoyed what we discussed in this lecture. Thank you very much. Bye.